They called me a hero. But what kind of hero lets the one he loves die in the fire? The crowd was cheering, but all I could hear were the screams in my head. That night I didn't know it was my own son who lit the match. The retirement banner sagged above the cinder block hall like a flag at half-mast. I stood at the podium in dress blues brass, catching the fluorescent glare, 38 years of service pinned to my chest like medals on a corpse. Then the rookie I'd been praising turned white as bunker ash and whispered the name I hadn't spoken in 20 years, Ethan. The room tilted, and the floor cracked open beneath me. The hall smelled of overcooked lasagna, burnt coffee, and the ghost of Old Spice that clung to every retired chief's jacket. Red plastic cups left wet rings on white tablecloths like blood on gauze. A hand-painted banner drooped across the back wall. Chief Frank Avery, 38 years of keeping us safe. The F in Frank had already begun to curl, the paint flaking like old turnout gear. I gripped the podium with knuckles gone white. The speech was memorized the way other men know the Pledge of Allegiance, every pause, every inflection. I opened my mouth to thank the town, the department, the wives who packed casseroles after double shifts. Instead, the words came out like gravel dragged across concrete. All of you know what it takes to run into a burning building when common sense tells you to run out. Most of you learned it from me. Some of you. I let the pause stretch the way I used to let silence stretch over the radio when a rookie forgot to key the mic. My eyes found him across the room. Ethan, my son, standing by the dessert table in a navy sport coat 2 shades too dark for July. He hadn't worn the uniform since the night Jake burned. Some of you, I repeated, voice dropping into the register, that once silenced a 3-alarm scene, never learned it at all. The room inhaled. A fork stopped halfway to Mrs. Dwyer's mouth, lasagna, dangling like a casualty. The auxiliary ladies froze mid-clap programs, fluttering against their palms. I felt the heat of 100 stares, but I kept my gaze locked on Ethan. He didn't flinch. He just set his coffee cup down with the soft click of ceramic on formica, a sound I hadn't heard since he was 12, and I was teaching him to fold the flag. I turned to the young lieutenant I'd been mentoring, Tommy Brennan, fresh out of the academy, cheeks still pink from probation. I clapped a hand on his shoulder the way I used to clap Jake's. Now this, I said, voice booming, the way it did over the radio on a 3rd alarm, this is the future of Station 51. Tommy pulled 3 civilians out of the Mill Street duplex last month. That's what service looks like. The room erupted. Whistles, boot stomps on the waxed linoleum. Someone started the chant, hip hip hooray. Tommy flushed, crimson, proud, and terrified in equal measure. I smiled the smile that had closed 1,000 incident reports. Vindication tasted like burnt coffee and cheap Merlot. Ethan didn't clap. He just watched. The way he used to watch me inspect his turnout gear when he was a pro, be quiet, measuring, waiting for the verdict. Then Tommy turned. His eyes landed on Ethan. The color drained from his face the way water drains from a ruptured 2.5. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The chant died in sections like a fire running out of fuel. Tommy's voice came out a whisper, but the hall carried it like a mayday. Captain Avery. Sir, are you talking about Ethan Avery? The name hung in the air, heavier than turnout gear, soaked in creek water. Old man Kowalski, retired, 89, stiffened in the back row. His oxygen cannula trembled against his cheek. Mrs. Dwyer set her fork down with the precision of a woman who once bandaged 1,000 playground knees. I chuckled the way you chuckle when the rookie drops the nozzle and you pretend it's part of training. Ethan files the paperwork now, Tommy. He keeps the spreadsheets, different kind of service. Tommy swallowed so hard I heard it from the podium. He looked at me, then at Ethan, then back at me. Sir, with respect, Ethan's the reason I'm breathing tonight. The lasagna in my stomach turned to cement. I opened my mouth to correct him, to remind him who taught him to pull ceilings, who made him run the tower until his legs gave out. But Tommy was already moving. He crossed the room in 4 strides, boots squeaking on the waxed floor. He stopped in front of Ethan and came to attention like he was on the parade deck. Captain, he said, loud enough for the auxiliary ladies to hear in the kitchen, permission to speak freely. Ethan gave the smallest nod, the kind you give when you're used to being the calm voice on the radio. Tommy turned to the room. Last April, the Mill Street duplex. We were committed on the second floor. Ceiling dropped, hose line burst. We had 12 seconds before flashover. Captain Avery Ethan redesigned the quick fill manifold on engine 51. Cut refill time from 45 seconds to 11. We got water. We got out. All 6 of us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass fitting no bigger than a hockey puck. He held it up like evidence. This is the part. He machined it himself in the shop after Chief said it was a tinkering. The room made a sound I'd never heard in 38 years. Not cheers, not gasps, something in between. Like air rushing back into a building after the fire's knocked down. I looked at Ethan. He hadn't moved. His hands were flat on the table, palms down, the way I taught him to keep them when he was 8, and I was teaching him to fold the flag. He met my eyes. No triumph, no smirk. Just the same steady gaze he'd had the night Jake burned. Kowalski stood, slowly, joints popping like green wood in a stove. He placed his gnarled hand over his heart. One by one, the old-timers followed. Not a salute. Something quieter. Something that didn't need a bugle. I felt the floor tilt, not in Ethan's favor. Away from mine. But before I take you deeper into that hall, before I tell you why a kid who'd never met my son would risk his career to speak his name, I need to take you back. Because the truth is, that moment didn't start in the banquet hall. It started 20 years earlier in a garage that smelled of diesel and melted plastic, where a father taught a boy that love and discipline were the same word. I was 8. The garage door rolled up like a verdict. Dad stood in the rectangle of light silhouette sharp against the red engine, his turnout coat hanging open like a warning. "You missed the hydrant drill," he said. I nodded. He didn't. He set my boots at 45-degree angles on the oil-stained concrete. "Check your air," he said. The SCBA bottle was empty, gauge needle kissing 0. He didn't refill it. Lesson 1: gear doesn't save you. Discipline does. I learned to breathe shallow that day, counting seconds like heartbeats. The house smelled of Folgers and kiwi shoe polish, black coffee and brass. That was our family fragrance. Mom believed in Mercy meatloaf, in the quiet click of her red grading pen. Dad believed in 0530 runs knife-edge creases and the snap of a flag in morning wind. She tucked poems into my lunchbox, Frost Hughes Dickinson, like contraband. He inspected my bed corners with a nickel. If it bounced, I passed. If it didn't, I ran the block until the streetlights flickered on and the porch light looked like a lighthouse I couldn't reach. At 10, he took me to the county fair. The volunteer department had a smoke trailer plywood rooms filled with theatrical fog kids crawling under tables, while dads and turnouts yelled, "Stay low." I wanted to go in. He said, "Leave the games to the civilians." His voice carried the same tone he used on the radio when a rookie forgot to call the hydrant. I pretended I didn't care. Pretending became practice. At 12, I asked to join the Explorer post. He went still the way he did when the tones dropped for a working fire. "You want attention?" he said, not looking up from the incident report he was signing. "Not service." I said I wanted both. He set the application down like a brick between us. "You don't have the Constitution." He didn't mean my lungs. He meant my place. Silence was his discipline. Dinner at 1800 sharp. Dishes stacked left of the sink plates, aligned like apparatus on the bay floor. News at 1900, Walter Cronkite's voice, the only one allowed to speak after grace. Lights out at 2200. When I aced algebra, he said, When I won the science fair with a working fire suppression drone, he said, "Don't get sloppy with your wiring." Saturday mornings, he inspected my room. The bed had to be drum tight. The boots had to sit at 45. Once he found a dust bunny under the dresser and handed me the broom without a word. I swept until the concrete shone like the apparatus floor after rookie hazing. My mother did her persuading in the margins. She drove me to the recruiter's office, parking 2 blocks away, so the chief's sedan wouldn't be seen from Main Street. While I filled out forms, she graded papers in the front seat red pen, moving like a metronome. When I came back with pamphlets, she didn't ask what he'd say. She asked what I wanted most. "A fair fight," I said. She tapped the wheel. "Train for unfair weather." Senior year, I mailed the Fire Academy application without telling him. I wrote my essay in the garage after midnight, the engine ticking, as it cooled the smell of diesel still clinging to my hoodie. I described the sound of a mayday, how it's not panic, it's precision. How order can open space inside someone told he's too small. When the thick envelope came, I pressed it to my chest until the paper warmed. I waited until he was in his study door cracked just enough for lamplight to spill into the hallway runner. I knocked. "Sir," I said. He slid the envelope open with a letter opener and read the first line. "We are pleased to offer—" He stopped, folded the paper, slid it back. "So you're serious about this?" I nodded. He turned to his ledger. "We'll discuss it later." We didn't. Graduation night, he didn't come to the backyard party Mom strung with white lights and lemonade in mason jars. Friends asked if I was scared. Yes and no, I said. Yes about the fire, no about the choice. Around 2100, a familiar sedan rolled past the cul-de-sac and kept going. It felt like being saluted and dismissed at once. The morning I left for the academy, Mom tucked 3 envelopes into my duffel. "Open when you're lonely, when you're hurt, when you forget who you are." She hugged me hard at the bus station, her hair smelling of Prel and chalk dust, then stepped back to inspect me like before the first day of school. "Check your air," she said, and we both laughed through the lump in our throats. Dad had an appointment to get the tires rotated. On the bus, a kid with a buzz cut asked if I was nervous. "Nerves are a compass," I said. "You just have to read them right." Out the window, the town slid by the hardware store with its faded John Deere sign, the diner with lemon pies cooling on the sill, the courthouse flag a little too big for the pole. As the miles thickened and the air leaned towards smoke, I pressed my forehead to the glass and let the cold settle my cheeks. I wasn't running from him. I was running toward the only argument that made sense: earn it. The academy smelled of cut grass chlorine and the sharp tang of new Nomex. Hair clippers snapped like gunfire. Clipboards appeared and vanished. Last name, height move. That night I lay on a narrow rack and recited the general orders so I wouldn't count the miles home. I thought about the kitchen linoleum and Dad's palms setting my shoulders. He had taught me to stand up straight. He just never imagined I'd do it while facing him. By taps, I had memorized the number stenkled on the bunk above me. I whispered it like a prayer and closed my eyes. I didn't know yet what the job would demand, what names they'd try to give me, or which ones I'd keep. I only knew the silence had done enough talking. It was my turn. The call came at 0217. 4 tones, not 3. Dad always said 3 was for drills. This was 4. Structure fire, possible entrapment, Maple Street duplex, kids inside. I was riding the jump seat on engine 51 knees knocking against the SCBA bracket. Jake was on the nozzle. 22 cocky thought fire was a video game you could respawn from. Dad was IC voice steady over the radio like God on a clear channel. He put us in the front door, primary search, 2 and 2 out, 60 seconds, no freelancing. The heat hit like a fist wrapped in wool. 0 visibility. The air tasted of melted vinyl and baby powder. I crawled behind Jake, counting doorways by field-gloved hands, sweeping the baseboard like a blind man reading Braille. We found the first kid under a bed, limp as a sack of flour. I passed him back to the RIT team, their silhouettes flickering in the strobes. Jake kept going. "Second floor's clear," he yelled into the radio. It wasn't. The ceiling dropped. Not a collapse of failure. The whole second floor pancaked into the living room with a sound like God slamming a dictionary. Jake was under it. I heard him key the mic. 1 word. Mayday. I dug with my hands. Turnout gloves shredded at the knuckles. Nails split. The smoke was blacker than night, thicker than guilt. I found his boot. Then his leg. Then nothing. The fire rolled overhead like a freight train made of napalm. Someone dragged me out by the shoulders. I fought them. I bit a glove. They pinned me to the dew-wet grass. The last thing I saw was Dad's face through the mask, eyes wide, mouth open, no sound. They pronounced Jake at 0304. Cause of death, crush injuries, thermal burns. The duplex was a total loss. The second kid never existed. Wrong address, wrong night, wrong everything. Dad didn't speak to me at the hospital. He stood in the hallway staring at the vending machine like it owed him quarters. Mom held my hand until the morphine took me. When I woke up, Dad was gone. There was a note on the tray table in his block print handwriting. "Gear doesn't save you, discipline does." Underneath in smaller letters, "You froze." I kept the note for 20 years. It yellowed in my wallet like a burn scar. The department investigation was swift. Probable cause, rapid fire progression due to hoarder conditions. No misconduct found. Dad signed the report. He never looked at me when he did. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Rain came down in sheets, drumming the casket like hail on a tin roof. The casket was closed. Dad stood at attention in his dress blues medals, catching the water like tears he wouldn't shed. I stood behind him in civilian clothes. My turnouts were evidence. When the bugler played taps, Dad's shoulders shook once. Just once, I reached for him. He stepped forward out of reach. That night, I sat in the garage. The engine was cold. I took Jake's helmet off the rack. The leather was still warm from the sun. I traced the dent where the ceiling had kissed it. I whispered the only thing I could think to say. I'm sorry. The helmet didn't answer. I replayed the search 1,000 times in my head. If I'd pulled Jake back sooner. If I'd checked the ceiling joist. If I'd refused the front door. If I'd been faster, stronger, smarter. The ifs stacked like cordwood, dry and ready to burn. Dad came in at 23:47. I heard his boots on the concrete, slow, deliberate. He stopped behind me. I waited for the lecture. It didn't come. He just stood there, breathing through his nose like he was counting to 10. Finally, you should have called the collapse. I didn't answer. He left. The door rolled down like a verdict. The next morning, I found Jake's nameplate on my bunk. Someone had pried it off the locker. No note. Just a brass rectangle still warm from someone's pocket. I slipped it into my turnout coat. It stayed there for 20 years. The town grieved in casseroles and quiet nods. Mrs. Dwyer brought lemon bars. Old man Kowalski left a six-pack of Strohs on the apparatus floor. Dad gave the eulogy at the firehouse. He never mentioned me. He talked about Jake's laugh, his fastball, the way he could quote backdraft line for line. He ended with, "Some men are born to the job, some men earn it." Jake did both. The room applauded. I stood in the backhands and pockets, feeling the nameplate cut into my palm. I tried to go back to work. The first shift, I couldn't find my gear. Someone had moved it to the storage room. I found it wrapped in plastic, labeled evidence. I sat on the bench and stared at it until the captain sent me home. I didn't fight him. Dad reassigned me to the training tower. "Until you're ready," he said. I never was. I spent my days running probies through the maze, teaching them to trust their air to read the smoke, to never trust a ceiling. At night, I sat in the shop with a lathe and a six-pack machining parts no one asked for. Quick connects, flow restrictors, a manifold that cut refill time from 45 seconds to 11. I tested them on engine 51 when Dad wasn't looking. The kids started calling me the Manifold Kid, not a nickname you put on a helmet. A nickname you earn when a crew walks out of a flashover because your part held. They knocked twice on my table before shift change. Superstition, respect, both. I never used the name. Others did. Once a visiting chief shook my hand and said, half smiling, "So you're the kid who hears the hum." I said, "I draw maps." He laughed. Maps make men feel safe inside them. But every night I heard Jake, not his voice, his silence, the space where his laugh should have been. I'd sit in the garage until the concrete went cold, tracing the dent in his helmet with my thumb. I'd whisper the same thing. "I'm sorry." The helmet still didn't answer. I wrote him on department letterhead, the kind with the gold embossed seal that smelled like fresh ink and old promises. I said the fire was colder than it looks on TV, that good men learn to laugh before bad nights, that my work mattered even when no one pinned it to a board. I tucked in a photo of me at the training tower, one hand on a Pelican case salt crust, whitening the chain link behind me. I signed with love and a return address. The letter came back unopened. Return to sender stamped in red like a mayday that never got answered. Mom kept the line alive by herself. Sunday evenings, she'd call and ask small questions that led a big life through. "Are you sleeping? Anything green on your plate? Did you find a chapel?" She never asked about fires. "I'm fine" was a dialect we both spoke. When we hung up, I stood and breathed, the phone still warm against my ear like a spent shell casing. I mailed him a photo the day I made lieutenant. Bars under fluorescent lights never look like they do in movies. Too pale, too honest. I wrote, "You taught me to check my air. It helps." A month later, the same picture returned in a fresh envelope, creased once across the middle like a snapped hose line. No note, just the fold. Illness entered quietly. Biopsy. Mom said it like she was sounding it out for a spelling bee. Dad informed me by email, 2 sentences correctly punctuated. I called from a stairwell in Quantico, where the heat clung like a wet shirt. Mom told me not to come yet. "Do your job," she said. "I'll do mine." When hospice called, I was already wheels up. The nurse spoke softly. Mom's hands were translucent. Blue was suddenly a color to fear. Dad stood at the window, arms crossed, guarding the parking lot like it might burn. I read to her because words were the first house we built together. Frost, then Mary Oliver, then whatever the visitor library offered. She drifted in and out like tide. When she woke clear, she pressed 2 fingers to my sleeve and whispered, "Keep flying, not away, just up." She died before sunrise. The room changed. At the funeral, I spoke second because he spoke first. I kept it plain, her car that smelled like lemons in winter, the way she graded with pencil and mercy, how she could name 5 birds by silhouette. When I glanced down, Dad was stapling the program together over and over like paper could become armor by repetition. He never looked back. Back on shift, I added a box to every pre-mission checklist. Who calls home if it goes sideways? We wrote names and carried numbers like talismans. The captain started leaving coffee on my desk without comment. The crew knocked twice on the table before briefs. We made a habit of asking, "How's your air?" meaning inside, not outside. An old lieutenant called it soft. Then he stopped after it saved a kid who hadn't learned how to say he was drowning. I tried phoning Dad late one night when miles make the tongue braver. He picked up on the second ring. "Hello." I asked about gutters weather, the neighbor's maple that had leaned dangerous for years. "Came down," he said. "Took out the fence." I said I was sorry. He said, "Check your tires before winter." We hung up like we'd coordinated a delivery. Promotions arrived like seasons announced, inevitable, still startling. A rumor of my nickname leaked past the rooms I ate in. He never asked. On his birthday, I mailed him a book of national parks because once when I was 7, he lifted me to a carved bear and said, "That's the real country." Inside, I wrote, "We could go see one together." He sent a thank you card with his name typed under the closing as if he were signing orders. There's a fatigue that doesn't come from miles. It comes from rehearsing answers to questions you know won't be asked. I learned to keep the phone face down and the ringer off. I learned to hold a truth without anyone saluting it. The crew knocked when it mattered. Dad's door swung only for weather. A mutual friend from their church finally broke our stalemate. She wrote in looping cursive, "He keeps your picture in his study. He doesn't talk about it." I read the sentence until it dulled. Care can look like custody. When the department pinned a commendation on me for something that belonged to a dozen hands, I sent him the program in block letters, just how he liked addresses. No response. A month later came a different envelope. "They're making you a symbol," in his small, precise script. 5 words that felt like a door closing. Labels are tidy until you live under them. A symbol doesn't sit with a grieving lieutenant at 0300. A symbol doesn't memorize families. I kept showing up with a pencil sharp and a map open, listening for the hum in the lines. I stopped needing him to hear it. I wrote one last time before the night in the hall. "I'm coming through town for a reunion," I said. "There's a seat if you want it." He didn't reply. The invitation felt like placing a glass of water by a sleeping man and walking out not expecting to find it empty or full, just not wanting him to wake thirsty. Silence taught me a paradox the job had only hinted at. You can love someone you don't let steer. You can respect the parts that built you without living under their roof. I stopped knocking on a door that opened only to drafts. I set the latch on my side. I waited for the work. It never makes you wait long. The first time I realized the crew was my family, we were ankle deep in gray water, under a sky the color of scraped metal. A storm had come in, crooked wind pushing the channel sideways, radios gurgling with salt. We were staged to launch a small package for a recovery that would never make the paper. Nothing cinematic, no hero shots, no swelling music. Just men checking straps with fingers that knew how to count heartbreak, and me at a folding table with a grease pencil and a plan I could run in my sleep. The captain said he never called me sir when it was just us. "You want a second set of eyes?" "I want your doubt," I said, sliding him the board. "If it holds up to that, it holds." He looked, grunted, then tapped a box I'd drawn in the corner. "You put the soft fail here." "Always put the soft fail where you can see it," I said. "Saves you from the hard one." He nodded, satisfied the way older brothers nod when the younger one finally lifts what he couldn't last summer. We moved. The operation bent once and then behaved. Not because luck grew generous, but because we had rehearsed the folds. Back at the pier, soaked in quiet, a young firefighter I'd been watching, good kid with a habit of aiming his jaw at the floor, stopped beside my table. "You knew the second pump was dying," he said. "I knew it could. I answered the only kind of knowing that keeps people." He chewed that, then said almost shy, "Thanks for making a plan I could fit inside." It was the best compliment I'd ever been given. Men who trusted maps more than speeches had decided mine could carry them. That's how a family is built in our world. One night of proof at a time. I didn't leave the job. I left the spotlight. I took the night shift at the training academy, the one that smelled of cut pine and diesel, where the tower lights buzzed like angry hornets, and the burned building exhaled smoke like a dragon with indigestion. I taught probies how to read smoke, how to trust their air gauge, how to fold a collapsed hose line in under 30 seconds without kinking the soul out of it. I rewrote the SOPs nobody reads until they need them, until the ceiling drops, and the only thing between them and the morgue is a paragraph I wrote at 0200 with a lukewarm cup of Folgers. I machined parts in the shop, after hours, brass fittings quick connects a manifold that cut refill time from 45 seconds to 11. I tested them on engine 51 when Dad wasn't looking, when the bay was quiet, and the only sound was the compressor hissing like a cat in a corner. The kids started calling me the Manifold Kid. Not a nickname you put on a helmet. A nickname you earn when a crew walks out of a flashover because your part held, because the water hit the seat of the fire before the fire hit their backs. They knocked twice on my table before shift change. Superstition, respect, both. I never used the name. Others did. Once a visiting chief shook my hand and said, half smiling, "So you're the kid who hears the hum." I said, "I draw maps." He laughed. Maps make men feel safe inside them. There were losses, some you can explain in reports, some you fold into a corner of yourself that no one else gets to touch. A good probie went quiet one spring and didn't come back from it. I sat with his file until the letters blurred. After I insisted on monthly check-ins that weren't about push-ups, we started asking each other how the air felt inside, not just outside. An old captain called it soft. Then he stopped after it saved a kid who hadn't learned how to say he was drowning. Word traveled the way it does on night shifts in chow halls over bad coffee, in rooms where boots line up at the threshold. I wasn't a legend. I was a rumor that survived inspection. Teams rotated. I rotated with some of them, teaching testing, rewriting checklists until they fit the way our days actually broke. Equipment that fails in rain. Batteries that lie about life. How to count down a man whose eyes are looking somewhere he can't return from. I added a line to every plan, who's watching the watcher. The old guard grumbled until the metrics came clean. Fewer injuries. Fewer near misses. More nights where the worst thing we brought home was diesel on our boots. The nickname followed me like a shadow at noon. Short. Unmistakable. I never used it. Others did. Between rotations, I kept rewriting the training modules the way you update a will. Not because you're eager to use it, but because you love what it protects. We added stress inoculation that wasn't about breaking bodies. It was about teaching a mind to recognize its own weather. I wrote a checklist called after what to do, not in the hour after contact, but in the week after the adrenaline leaves and the silence arrives. We piloted it with 3 platoons. Near misses dropped, bad surprises shrank. The old guard teased and then started using the forms when no one watched. The captain called it Widow's Church, half joking, half grateful. Everybody gets out with their shoes. We made rituals that look small. Knock twice on the table before wheels up. Ask how's your air in the chow line and wait for the answer. Make the new guys brief the boring parts so they learn boredom keeps you alive. When a lieutenant's marriage cracked, we found him a counselor who knew how to sit with men who traded sleep for safety. When a kid's mother got sick, the platoon pretended it was logistics and arranged the flights. One afternoon in the cage, I watched a group of candidates work a knot they'd pretend wasn't choking them. Sweat turned their shirts into maps. An instructor barked. I stepped in only to ask a question. "What's your plan when the plan's wrong?" Blank stares at first, then one spoke. "We look for the pattern under the pattern." I smiled. That's a life skill, not just a job skill. Keep it. Reputation is a slow river. You notice it only when it's carved the bank. Directors from the other side of the house, intel logistics, even a doc with hands steady enough to stitch a hummingbird, started drifting by my little room with questions. I printed fewer glossy slides and more checklists. I learned to translate between men who built doors and men who'd kicked them. The nickname, which I still never used for myself, traveled like a postcard with no return address. A visiting captain introduced me at a briefing as the one who hears the web hum. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. It wasn't humming I heard. It was men. Their pauses, their jokes too loud, the way hands fumbled a strap when thoughts were at home in rooms they feared. You learn to listen to what a body says when the mouth is busy elsewhere. One winter, the bay turned mean and took a firefighter who didn't deserve it. We stood in dress blues on a cold parade deck while the wind stabbed and a bell tolled a count too small for the size of the loss. Afterward, a kid the age I would have been if the world were kinder stood in front of me and tried to ask how to bear it. You don't, I said softly. You carry it. There's a difference. He nodded, eyes bright like a man filing away a truth he didn't want but would need. Loyalty returned in currencies that lasted longer than medals. The captain named his second daughter Avery because he said the name could run. Torres, who had once sneered at my mental health check-ins, now ran them with a voice you could sit on. At Christmas, my desk filled with cards from people who didn't write cards. Captain 1, scribbled your web kept me breathing this year. On leave again, I visited a base where the chapel had more scuffs on its pews than the gym had on its floor. A chaplain I trusted said, "You know you're ministering." I laughed. "I'm managing risk." He tilted his head. Same job, different incense. The kid with the jaw tilt, his name was Tommy, turned into a man in front of me, the way sun turns frost into a road. He'd be the one years later to see me in a crowded hall and lose his voice, memory, and gratitude colliding behind his eyes. But before he could know that, he had to learn a different lesson, how to step into a room and make everyone else taller. We practiced. I made him brief, then fail, then fix it. "You're not a gun with legs," I told him. "You're a human with a brain that makes it home." The hall breathed like a single lung after Tommy's question landed. "Sir, your son's why I'm breathing tonight." Conversations thinned into threads, then snapped. A coffee urn gurgled and went still. The ceiling fans kept their slow rotation as if the air hadn't changed its mind. Dad's hand was still on Tommy's shoulder, fingers spread with the familiarity of men who understand rank and muscle. He looked from the young lieutenant to me and back again. Comprehension hunting for a foothold. The proud set of his jaw faltered. Just a tremor, a hairline crack. Anyone else would have called it the light. Tommy swallowed. I saw the tell 2 beats high in his throat. He straightened, squaring to something he hadn't expected to salute tonight. "Chief," he said, voice steadier, louder, so there'd be no mistaking it now. "Permission to breathe." I gave the nod. "Then talk." He took a breath like a man surfacing. Mill Street duplex. We were committed. Ceiling dropped. Hose burst. 12 seconds to flash over. Captain Avery's manifold, the one you called tinkering, cut refill to 11. We got water. We got out. All 6. He held up the brass fitting again. The overhead fluorescence caught the machining marks, my marks. A murmur rolled the length of the room. The old VFW men in polo shirts shifted expressions, rearranging. The auxiliary ladies lowered their paper programs. A boy of 12 looked at me like I'd stepped out of a story he'd wanted to believe. Dad released Tommy's shoulder as if it had grown hot. "What is this?" he asked the room so he wouldn't have to ask me. He chuckled once for a show. "Some nickname my son files papers." He doesn't. Sir Tommy cut in with respect. He doesn't file. He didn't finish the sentence because he didn't need to. The men who have walked back into fluorescent light carrying pieces they didn't count on know how to leave blanks intact. I moved then, not much, half a step that put me where I could see the doors. The old flag by the stage, the reflection of us all in the glass of the trophy case. "It's just a part," I said. "Parts are lighter than work." A veteran near the coffee urn cleared his throat. "Which station?" he asked, though the answer didn't matter. "Habit." 51, Tommy said, eyes still on me, long enough to teach us to listen for the hum. The hum, the word carried. A man in the back who had stood taller when Dad spoke now leaned forward, elbows on knees. I moved into a small rental house outside Norfolk, not far from the base. It had peeling white paint, an old swing in the front yard, and a garden patch that hadn't seen love in years. The girls didn't care. To them, it was a palace. They ran through every room that first night, touching the walls like they couldn't believe they were real. When I showed them their beds, fresh sheets, pink blankets, they stared, then burst into laughter, jumping up and down like little springs. I laughed too. It felt strange hearing laughter in a house that had been silent for so long. I didn't know the language of motherhood. I'd spent my adult life managing supplies orders and people twice my size, but never bedtime stories, bruised knees, or nightmares. Every morning I'd braid their hair unevenly and burn the pancakes. Every night I'd check twice that the doors were locked, as if fear itself might blow in with the wind. The first few weeks were blissful chaos. Then reality came knocking loud and cold. He nodded, jaw locking and unlocking emotions, learning new boots. He didn't know, he said, glancing at Dad. He didn't want to, I said. There's a difference. Dad hovered near the stage, hands clasped behind his back, like a man inspecting a field he'd sown for rocks. People gave him space, respect for what he had been wrestled with, irritation at what he was being. He stared at the flag and didn't salute. I poured coffee I didn't want and found myself surrounded by small talk that was really big talk. We're proud of you. Did you know Artina joined the Air Force? My brother served. He would have liked you. I accepted each sentence the way you accept medals, gently, because the giver needs the ceremony more than you do. When I turned back, Dad was closer. Not close. Closer. He studied my face with a concentration that used to precede a lecture on discipline. If any of this is true, he said, each word weighed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked, I said. Then kinda because I couldn't, and you didn't want to hear. He considered that with the fairness he reserved for geometry and weather. His mouth tightened, then softened. I wanted... He stopped. I expected he stopped again. The sentence, a bridge with missing planks. Finally, I didn't know the language. It was the first honest thing between us in 20 years. Not absolution, a foothold. You don't have to speak it, I said. You just have to stop correcting my accent. A laugh broke from someone behind us. Not unkind. Dad didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped a quarter inch. And for the first time that night, he wasn't performing a man he needed to be. He was just a man out of date and out of breath, trying to read a map that had acquired new roads while he slept. Tommy lifted his cup toward me. Small salute, then faded back into the cluster of men who know how to be silent without being absent. Around us, the room reset to ordinary. The ice clink of tea, the scrape of chairs, the clatter of forks. But nothing had returned to its old measurement. The scale had tilted gently, permanently. Later someone would say, do you remember the night Chief Avery's line fell flat? Someone else would say, do you remember the kid who trembled? And a third would say, with the certainty of someone who saw the manifold after it was pointed out, do you remember how we all stood? Just a little, I do. I remember the exact sound the linoleum made when respect put its weight down. The town emptied into night the way it always does, slowly, like a hymn thinning into echoes. After the hall, I drove the long way past the high school bleachers, still chained off since the '92 flood. The diner that never changed its pie recipe, the hardware store that still displayed a flag in the window, big enough to shade a truck. I let the engine idle by the river, where the water wore the moon like a bruise. I hadn't meant to stay, but leaving without checking my interior felt like bad planning. You don't step off a Target building without looking at your team. You don't close a door on a night like that without looking at yourself. The dashboard clock ticked past midnight. Jake's nameplate was still in my pocket, edges worn smooth from 20 years of thumbing. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number, then a second from a familiar one. Tommy, first captain, didn't want to make a mess. Just wanted to hand back what you handed me. I typed back, you did fine. We all got home. Then the second message, not words, an image. A photo taken from the far end of the hall, slightly tilted. People standing, Dad in the foreground, not standing, but not as straight as before either, as if the air had changed density and his body didn't quite know how to live in it yet. I saved it without a caption. Some pictures don't need words. I slept at the station guest bunk because history can crowd a house. The cot smelled of bleach and old sweat, the kind that never washes out. Dreams came in fragments, Jake's boot in the debris, the brass fitting gleaming under fluorescence, Dad's shoulders dropping that quarter inch. I woke before the tones, ribs tight like I'd been crawling. In the morning, I ran the perimeter road until my ribs found their rhythm. Movement is a form of forgiveness you can give yourself without anyone's permission. The gravel crunched under my Nike's dawn lights, slanting through the pines like search beams. Sweat stung my eyes and washed something else with it, guilt maybe, or the last of the silence. By the time I finished, the bay doors were rolling up, probies wiping sleep from their faces. I nodded to the captain on duty. He knocked twice on the doorframe as I passed. Old habit. By noon, I was sitting on the porch steps of Dad's house, palms flat on the paint that needed a new coat peeling in curls like old hose gaskets. The yard smelled of fresh-cut grass and motor oil the same as always. He opened the door with his mouth already forming a sentence, then stopped. He looked older on his own threshold than he had under the fluorescent lights. Men shrink differently under different skies. For a heartbeat, he seemed surprised that I had the address. Then he stepped back to let me in. Coffee, he asked, defaulting to ritual. Yes, I said, defaulting to mercy. We took our old places at the kitchen table that had weathered our war's legs, scarred from chair legs and hot pots. He kept his hands around the mug like it was field heat steam curling between us, like smoke from a chimney test. I kept mine on the table so he could see they were empty. The clock over the sink ticked the way it always had, steady as a low-air alarm. I didn't know, he said finally. 4 words that weigh more than an apology if you're careful with them. I didn't tell you I countered, then added what mattered. I couldn't, and you didn't ask. He considered that, and the fairness that had once made him a good IC reappeared around the eyes. I didn't ask, he repeated, not defensively, just recording a fact. I wanted, he inhaled, then exhaled the past. I expected a son to carry a name. That was foolish and unkind. I didn't rush in to absolve. We were both too old for quick repairs. Names get heavy, I said. I picked up a different kind of weight. He nodded slow. They called you. He trailed off, embarrassed by the romance of it. A nickname is just a handle, I said. What matters is what you lift with it. He stared at a spot on the table where the varnish had bubbled years ago when I'd set a pot down too hot. He'd lectured me for an hour. Now he reached out and touched the blemish like it was a map legend. Did you ever want me there, he asked. Only if you could stand, I said. Not for me, for yourself. We talked not about fires or fittings, but about the air inside old men, about loss that arrives first as silence and then as furniture you keep bumping into at night. I told him Mom's last words because they belonged to both of us. Keep flying. Not away, just up. He looked away long enough that the clock marked 3 full minutes. When he turned back, his voice had changed key. If I came to something, he made a general gesture that meant anything with chairs facing forward. Would there be a seat? There's always a seat, I said. You choose where to put your hands. His gaze moved to the doorway and stayed there. I realized he was seeing himself walk through it, not as a chief, but as a penitent. The muscles for that motion had atrophied. He would have to build them like any rookie. We sat until the coffee went cold. He mentioned Jake once, voice rough as bunker gear. I blamed you because I couldn't blame the fire. I nodded. Blame's a bad manifold. Clogs everything. He almost smiled. I didn't wait for him to say a braver sentence. The plan was simple: leave without slamming, return without requirement. I stood, rinsed my mug, set it upside down to dry. At the threshold, he cleared his throat. Proud. 1 word naked, then quieter, as if he didn't want to startle the truth even when I didn't know how. I didn't cry. I nodded. Do the knowing now, I said, and stepped into the bright. Weeks later, an envelope arrived in his precise hand. Inside, a clipping from the local paper about the reunion, and beneath it, I should have stood sooner. I pinned it beside a manifold blueprint and let it make the room a little different. Tommy visited once, brought his mother's pecan pie. We sat on crates. You told the truth, I said. Truth stands up fine without a witness, but some nights it appreciates the company. In the end, redemption didn't feel like spectacle. It felt like stillness, like choosing not to twist the knife when history hands it to you. Like standing so straight, other people remember their own spines and find them sufficient. The room had stood. Dad hadn't then, couldn't then, maybe would. That was enough beginning for one life. If this story sat with you, if it reminded you of a silence that broke or a room that changed because a truth finally spoke, take a breath with me. Share your moment below so someone else can borrow your courage. And if you want more stories that carry weight without shouting about service, mercy, and standing tall, stick around, subscribe, and bring a friend who needs the reminder. We rise straighter when we rise together.